A public meeting would have a detrimental effect on the negotiating position of the public body. An open session will reconvene at the conclusion of the executive session. And then it's you, sir.
I move that the board vote to convene an executive session under MGL Chapter 30A, subsection 21A3, for the purpose of conducting strategy sessions in preparation for collective bargaining with Local 4134, International Association of Firefighters.
Second. All those in favor? Oh, a poll individually. Anita Mecklenburg, aye.
Kevin Calcutt, aye.
And then we are officially in executive session. Thank you, Andrew. We're in executive session. Thank you, and we're back from executive session, and I just would like to share with copious people in our meeting today that we have approved the MOA with the firefighters union. The board has approved that. Some of the details of the union is the adoption of a step system that puts it in line with the other organizations or other groups in town. There is a wage scale increase of 1.5%. There's an increase of the clothing allowance. There's a change in a job title classification from lieutenant to captain. There's some limits for new hires after 25 years of service. There's the addition of Juneteenth as a holiday, a reduction in the minimum hourly pay for ambulance calls, and an implementation of a drug and alcohol testing policy that's in line with what's already in place in town. Obviously, this is subject to town meeting approval, and specific details will be shared with the public at a future meeting. So thank you. Does that do the job?
Yes.
Excellent. And then, Andrew, we're going to go out of order a little bit. So Chief Kinney, we're going to move him up on the agenda. Oops.
We'll do public comment first.
Public comment first. Just a second, I got to get to my right section here. Here we go. So we'll take public comment if anybody in the public has 3 minutes of things to say that are, there's no public out there. Nobody waving their hand, so we will move on. I'm going to skip to number 4 at this time to execute a contract with Chief Kinney.
Great, thank you. So the board has a memo in a proposed agreement with Fire Chief Kinney. Just want to clarify that the Fire Chief's original contract was due to expire in December 31st of this year. The board gave its intent to continue employment with Chief Kinney. They authorized me to do negotiations with Chief Kinney. I'm glad to say that we have reached an agreement, and that is part of the packet, the details of that agreement. There isn't really significant changes within it, but I do want to just say that during my time here, Chief Kinney's performance and professionalism as the fire chief has been exceptional since I've been here. I'm excited that he wants to stay and be a part of this team and this group, and pleased that the board wants to continue with that with him as well.
Thank you. Any questions or comments?
I would probably just say that, in 3 short years, Chief Kinney, you've been an incredible advocate for the fire department and everybody who works there. You've been incredibly respectful. You've been a fantastic member of the team. You acclimated quickly. And most of all, above everything else, you've become a part of this community. I think that everybody recognizes you now and runs up to you to say hi to you. And it's going to be hard to lose that level of fame. So I hope you're ready for what the next 3 years is going to bring. Thank you.
I'm equally excited to have you on for the next 3 years. I feel that you're a real asset to the town, an important cog in the town of Norfolk. And I also, just to add on to the other accolades, I appreciate when you come before the board. I always feel like a real sense of thoughtfulness and intention in the material that you share with us, and I'm super appreciative of that. And so thank you very much, and thank you for your leadership and helping us to stay safe in Norfolk. So thank you very much.
I don't know if the chief wanted to say anything briefly before there's a motion. One other thing that I'll add that I've learned with Chief, there was a wonderful photo of him at the senior center lifting up the Santa, and the whole fire team was there. But I think that exemplifies the chief's personality. He's a big, loving teddy bear, I guess. There.
That's fitting. I just wanted to express my thanks and appreciation. Obviously, I think I expressed to you all when I was first appointed. This is obviously a passion of mine, and it has been a lifelong dream to be, a fire chief in a small town where there's still a level of intimacy and the ability to kind of know my community, be immersed in it, and as well as my personnel, and to, just be connected. And I really appreciate you all's trust and faith in me. And I look forward to 3 more years and hopefully many years after that as well. I'm excited for what the future holds with the fire department. You all have a phenomenal group of young men and women that serve this town. Their passion and commitment is is second to none, and I'm really honored and privileged to be able to lead that organization and to lead those young men and women. And I'm very excited for what the future holds. And thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
With that, I move that the Select Board reappoint Aaron Kinney as Fire Chief for a 3-year period commencing on January 1st, 2023, and approve the renewal of his employment agreement in the document attached. Fire Chief Kinney Employment Agreement Final 1/1/23 through 12/31/25.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you, sir. So number 2, to vote to allow liquor licensed restaurants to extend hours on New Year's Eve until 2 a.m. And I understand that nobody is interested in extending their hours. Thank you.
Yep. We've reached out to all the restaurants that may be interested. They all replied and say they are not interested in extending their hours, so there's no motion or action required on this item.
Awesome. Any questions before I go on?
None whatsoever.
Number 3, vote to approve various directional sign permits expiring at the end of the year.
So this item is sort of an annual process that businesses provide their own signs, directional signs. They're installed by DPW. It costs about $5 a year, and our office reached out to the various businesses to make sure that they were still interested in implementing these directional signs. So we're just asking the board to vote to renew them. And it seems like an annual process since 1996.
Awesome. I do not have any questions. Do you, Kevin?
None on my end, no. So with that, I move that the board vote to renew permits for directional signs for the following businesses: Cable Land, Dunkin' Donuts, Gulf Subway, and 4 Kick Sports Complex for 2023.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
I'm going to skip now to number 5. Vote to adopt the select board goals and objectives.
So I don't know if the board wants anything further to discuss in terms of goals and objectives, but I did implement some of the changes that I heard from each of you based on the feedback I heard from the previous meeting, as well as individual conversations with you both. There's a red line version of it within your packet. Just quickly say that we added sort of a language for diversity. Kevin, we kind of agreed with you in making sure that we had some more actionable items, so made some adjustments in terms of like goals for grant funding, what we're doing with a digital budget book. So try to implement some of those changes that you ask, and Anita, in terms of diversity, equity, inclusion. So that's the feedback that I had from the board. I don't know if you want any other further changes or anything, but if not, I would ask that you consider it.
The only thing that I thought of, and I didn't email you because I was thinking of it as preparing for this meeting earlier this evening, is this is an annual, excuse me, an annual review of goals. So in terms of having a timeline, the timeline is just annually. We would review, or we'll have a mid-year check-in, or what is the intent on monitoring the progress toward the goals?
That's a very good question, a good point. We're a little bit later in the game than what the board typically has had these goals and objectives. I envision maybe do a sort of maybe a quarterly check-in, maybe the end of year sort of update. I think there are a portion of these goals and objectives were based on feedback that I heard from you as I was coming aboard. So I think there are some actual items that we'll be able to make progress in. So a quarterly check would be good for this year, and then maybe the end of year update. In the future, I think we revert to how we previously did it, have goals and objectives early in the year, and then maybe do a quarterly check and update, give the board an update from myself and even department heads where we are on goals and objectives. Another goal is obviously, if the board decides to adopt these goals and objectives, would be to talk with the department heads at our next department head meeting and sort of incorporate this in terms of our budget process as well. So it'll be
Awesome.
quick moving this year.
Excellent. Questions or
No,
comments?
this looks fantastic. Thank you so much.
I think so too. I think it feels much more accessible than what we had done before. So thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you.
With that, I move that the board approve the FY23 goals and objectives for the Select Board as amended.
Second, all those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Number 6, update on hazard mitigation plan.
So we have our planner, Rich McCarthy, is joining us via Zoom, so give the next 2 items.
Thank you.
Apparently from Saturn.
Of space.
From space.
Good evening. Yes, I'm here to join you from outer space. Thanks for having me. No, I'm just kidding. So hazard mitigation, thank you for a couple minutes. For tonight, it's really just a kind of plug. We have a public meeting via Zoom Thursday night, December 15th at 7 p.m. for the public, department heads, and so forth. Hopefully can attend. The purpose of that meeting is to gather public info as it relates to hazards. We had our previous hazard mitigation plan was from 2010. We've been meeting with, in terms of we, I say department heads, with MAPC, Metropolitan Area Planning Council, going over the plan from 2010, looking at goals and objectives from that plan to see what has been implemented, what hasn't been implemented, what things might need to be revised, and then also to look and for Thursday nights to talk about other hazards that we need to try and address going forward. This plan is a requirement from FEMA, Federal Emergency Management Association, or I think association, right? Well, FEMA. And it's important to us in terms of when there are hazards that occur, that if we need to get reimbursement for expenses for those, that we have this plan in place. And there's a variety of ones, and they scale. It could be down trees from a storm burst, you name it. This plan would help us obtain additional funding down the road, and then would also be something that, looking at our plan in the end, what we might want to try to seek additional funding to try to correct. So for example, we've had issues with flooding in town. We may want to identify a project. For example, I know you're pretty familiar with the Seacon Street project in terms of addressing that culvert. That's something that, having that on the plan, we can address going forward. And it is multiple department-wide in terms of this planning. It's not just rest in the land use departments, public safety, schools, facilities, et cetera. So this is just hopefully you can join us Thursday night via Zoom, and we will have a second public meeting. It's late winter, early spring, somewhere around there. But so that's, I'll just pause there if there's any particular questions you might have.
I don't have any questions.
No, it sounds great. Is it possible to see a draft of the plan before the meeting?
So we're in the information gathering right now, so we don't actually have, well, I
Cool.
should say that. We have the old plan, but the new plan that's in creation point.
Cool. Thank you.
We can, to that point though, we can add that to the webpage now to have that available to the public. So that's something that we'll take as an action item to put on the website, that people could see the old plan as we update the new one.
Excellent. You could do a QR code on the beautiful brochure, then people could scan it and see it right there.
I'm sure I can. I'll figure it out.
Okay, just,
Sounds good.
Just to reiterate for Richard, the intent of this meeting is to get engagement from the community, hear about some of the work that we're doing. It is an interdepartmental effort to update our hazard mitigation plan. So,
cool. Thank you for doing this important work. We good?
Good.
Thank you. So I'm going to go on. Do we need to do a, no, that's informational. Number 7, update on housing choice compliance. That's you again, Rich, yes?
Yes. So what, in terms of housing choice compliance, we had, as a town, applied for technical assistance about a month ago, and I'm happy to say that we were awarded a $20,000 grant to help us in the evaluation process in terms of compliance with housing choice. For those that might not remember, in terms of housing choice, it's a amendment to the State Zoning Act under Section 3A for MBTA communities to have at least one district of reasonable size for multifamily housing. What we have learned since the guidelines have been put out in August, what reasonable size means is 50 acres in area. And what we also have learned is some of the existing provisions that we have within our bylaw don't comply. For example, at the time when if you remember, we were working on the B1 zoning for downtown, we were fairly confident, or at least hopeful, that multifamily housing associated with mixed-use development would comply with the new guidelines, which unfortunately it does not. You can have mixed use, but to complement it, but it can't be a component of it. So essentially what that means is, one of the compliance things we have to assess is having by right multifamily zoning within that district. So that's unfortunately something we've learned that we don't comply with. Another provision which we don't comply with is our inclusionary bylaw. We need to take a look at that as well. So the next step for us is to submit an action plan, which is due at the end of January of 2023, January 31st. And it's not a heavy lift. Essentially, it's some benchmarks where we talk about how we're going to do public outreach, what we may contemplate in terms of zoning to try to comply with the housing choice provision. There'll be public hearings involved, of course. Ultimately, if something comes, it would have to go to town meeting. And then the compliance deadline to the housing choice is December 31st, 2024. And what this is tied into is there's some grant funds at the state that are connected to having housing choice compliance, which is the MassWorks grant program, the housing choice program, both of which we've had success in acquiring grants in the past. And then the one I'm honestly doing a little more homework, and maybe Justin can help me with, which looks a little bit at face value, is the local capital projects funding, another grant source. As I'm kind of learning on what's interesting with that one is that one's tied to the gambling revenue fund, which I've learned. So that might be one of those sneaky, well, I shouldn't say sneaky, that's probably not the way we describe it, but one that people might not be as familiar with, which potentially is a funding source going forward that many cities and towns will need to, or will be interested in getting money from, particularly now with sports betting coming online shortly, if that money goes into that. So it's, of course, you could do a no action. The town could decide collectively we don't want to comply. And there's the only penalty per se is that we would be precluded from trying to seek grant funds from those funding sources.
Do you want to add anything to that?
No, the only thing I would add is that, the housing choice compliance is, it's a complex issue. We are committed to trying to get as much technical assistance as possible. Obviously, we just got the email this afternoon that I think we're going to get the full $20,000. I think it's up to $20,000 you can get in the technical assistance, but that's something that we're definitely going to be looking towards. Particularly, I believe, when Rich mentioned when the town was looking at B1 sort of changes, they thought that it would comply, and we're finding that it isn't. So we're going to be proactive about this and try to get as much assistance as possible, but also keep the board in the loop as we progress on this issue as well.
So Rich, just a quick question for you. Obviously, after having gone through the B1 process for so long and having thought that, we were accommodating for what was going to be coming down the pike in terms of this new requirement, we had always talked about the idea that the changes that we made for B1 were essentially a phase 1 kind of action, that there would have to be a phase 2 follow-up action somewhere down the road to be able to realize the vision that we had aligned on for Town Center. How much does this deter from that original plan that we set forth? Or is this really just an added aspect to what we're already doing?
So I would probably say it's more additive to the process. I think, there's, so for example, if you're, not to go too deep dive into this, but one of the provisions we had within the B1 zoning was to have standalone commercial on the same property with multifamily housing together. And the way the existing bylaw works was really challenging to interpret and really kind of bared out that it maybe wasn't feasible. Now, with the housing choice, it kind of gives us a reason, I think, supporting reason to go back and take a look at it. So that was one aspect of it. The other one, which I did mention to you, was the whole component in terms of affordable housing. You recall what we had in terms of for the general public and the board, well, particularly Nita, I don't know how close you followed the B1 back then, but we had gone through analysis where we were looking at 10%, which is the original inclusionary provision for affordable housing. And then we talked about increasing it maybe, upwards of 15%, but we were cognizant of trying to make a project that provides affordable housing, but it also has a broader purpose in providing economic development from commercial. So we tried to balance those two things out. As it turns out, with the housing choice bill, you can go up to 10%, but to go beyond 10%, you need to show that having a higher affordable requirement than 10% is in fact going to create housing production. Because what gets confusing, I think, to a lot of folks is housing choice is about housing production. It's not about affordable housing.
Right.
You can, in fact, you don't need to provide affordable housing under housing choice. However, towns obviously are trying to be aware and cognizant of the affordable housing goals, and they're trying to also do that at the same time. So putting those two things together. In fact, they made amendments to the guidelines for housing choice in October that you could actually, that affordable housing doesn't mean affordable housing of 80% or less low and moderate income. So stuff that would go on our housing inventory for 40B. They opened it up even broadly that if you create, I'll call it broad affordable housing for folks, that's fine. So so as we go forward, having the grant, I think, will be important so we can go through these issues. But also hopefully make the public aware. These are complex, interrelated things, and it's not so easy to navigate necessarily. So that scope of work that I mentioned is that the grant would run through June of 2023. So what we'll do is, and what I will be doing is, I'll come back to the board after meeting with a consultant, and Justin and I will sit down with a consultant and Kate and say, look, this is what we want to try to accomplish, and we'll come back to the board to let you know what we're thinking for this, I'll call it, January to June timeframe, what we want to try to accomplish, and then report to the planning board. I met with the Affordable Housing Trust this afternoon, saying, meet with them to talk about what the approach will be going forward.
Thanks, Rich. I just had one more point just to kind of add on to that. One of the great benefits of this program is that this isn't going to be a broadly available grant program. This is going to be only for communities that were within compliance by the date that you mentioned at the end of 2024. I know for a fact there are communities who have already said, look, we're just not going to do this, right? Whether it be because they don't have a stop within their town, they're an adjacent community, so they don't feel that there's an ability to be able to accommodate for this, or just because they have a separate plan in place that they're going to adhere to and don't want to have to add this in. there's going to be a pool of money that we're going to have access to that not everybody is necessarily going to have access to. So I think there's a great benefit for us to really just kind of connect the few last links on this to be able to accommodate it.
Yes, that's a point well taken. I think the one thing that, as we go forward and help educate the public on this, is that you have to have, so the idea is the district has capacity, has the ability zoning wise. It doesn't mean that's what's going to get built out though, because you still have to comply with the Wetlands Protection Act. Well, actually, in fact, that gets taken out of the district, but wastewater, so septic, you have to comply with stormwater requirements. So while it might be 15 units per acre, what you ultimately build out of it is not going to be 15 units per acre, because you got to accommodate for stormwater, you got to accommodate for septic. So, it is a scary number, I will tell you, because our number is 750 units. So it is a large number. I'm not going to say it's not, but when you start to drill down, it's just, for example, you could have property that already is developed included, long as it's potentially developable. So you can't have municipal property necessarily if it's not available for development, but there can be property that's already developed that might be redeveloped included within that district.
And just to preface what you just said too, 750 units is the absolute minimum that any town can have regardless of their size. That is the minimum that was set by the statute. So
Yeah,
we're at the
unfortunately,
floor already.
Yeah, they did this like, we could have, so if you apply their model, it's like, well, technically Norfolk could have a lot less than that, but no, we're going to have 750.
Right.
So we're not the only ones, but yeah, that's the minimum.
All right, I'll stop torturing you now. Thank you, Rich.
That's almost a tenth of our population. Like, that's a big number
It is a big number, yes.
for little Norfolk. So thank you. That was very informative, actually, so thank you very much. And are you going to be able to travel safely back to the Earth for the holidays?
Yes, a matter of fact, I'll be in Town Hall tomorrow morning, ready to go for the next day of work.
Excellent. Safe landing.
Thank you.
Thank you. We good?
Good.
Number 8, discussion of a plan to utilize federal ARPA funds.
Yeah, so I just wanted to provide an update to the board and to the community about where we're at, and just give a general overview of ARPA and what we've done so far. So the town was appropriated about $3.5 million in ARPA funds. $1.5 million was given directly to the town in terms of revenue replacement. 1.2 was direct, and then about $250,000 came from the county for revenue replacement. And generally speaking, revenue replacement allows the town to just spend those funds in whatever manner the town thinks necessary to utilize those funds. About $2 million then is from the county, and those county funds are sort of county designated funds laid out in terms of ARPA. You can use them to replace lost public sector revenue. We don't qualify for that. We already got our full allotment of revenue loss, so we're assuming that. Respond to public health and negative impacts of the pandemic. Premium pay for essential workers, although that is pretty specific and limited. And then water, sewer, and broadband infrastructure. So as I came aboard, what we did was we met with every department. We opened it up to other groups, listened to the Affordable Housing Trust, and had some proposals from departments. Total is about $10 million in requests, and we have $3.5 million, and about 1.5 of it's only revenue replacement. So the rest is sort of limited. What I plan on doing with the board's approval is in the beginning of January, I would like to provide a list, a recommendation of how to utilize those funds. Have the board consider that list, maybe allow some time for the community to digest that list as well, and then have another meeting to have the board approve those funds. I wasn't prepared to provide that list today because I didn't think it prudent to put that list without considering the select board's goals and objectives as well, right? That might have a factor in how those ARPA funds are utilized as well. But we've met with every department. We have a recommended list that we are working on, and so the first meeting in January, I'll provide that list to the board, maybe in advance, but we'll present it in January.
Thank you. Any questions?
None whatsoever. I do know that we are meeting with the Norfolk County Advisory Board shortly, so if there is anything that would be of use to bring to them or to be able to bring up in those forums, please just let me know. I think we're meeting in January.
Thank you. We did have, so there were some proposed expenditures that were initially proposed, and the board signed off on these, and they are Norfolk County expenses. We did want to have some clarification on whether we could utilize that in the county portion of funds or our local sort of funds. So I'll collaborate with you on that, because we want to just we want to maximize the revenue loss, because that gives us our flexibility to spend in whatever manner that we see. The county it's a lot more specific, a lot more requirements. You have to get approval from the board. They've got a legal team and compliance. So there's a lot more involved with the county side. So we'll collaborate with you on that.
Thank you. Good.
All good. Thank you.
Thank you. And then town administrator updates.
So not much updates, but I did receive some interesting information from Ann, so I did want to give Recreation a nice little shout out here. Recreation Commission started opening up their winter programming, and we love data, and so have a little data for the group here. Registration opened last Wednesday, and to date we've had 1,120 registrations. That's equated to almost $100,000 in revenue for recreation, and that's up close to 20% over the previous year. And what's even good to know is that the number of transactions increased by that same amount is essentially how many households are participating. So it's almost 20% more people are participating in our programming. We're offering more classes, expanding to adult programming. It doesn't include the kids basketball, which I hear has over 500 kids. It's just great work by our recreation team. That's really heartening to hear that people are enjoying the programming that we're offering and getting involved. So good job, Ann and Josh, and all of our residents participating.
Absolutely.
Fabulous.
Unfortunately, about 5,000 come from my household, so.
And that's pretty much it for town minister updates.
Cool. Warrants.
I move that the board approve one warrant for December 6, 2022, as printed on the agenda for this meeting.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
And then minutes.
I also move that the board approve the meeting minutes of November 21st, 2022.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
And I move that we adjourn this meeting of the Select Board.
Second. All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Thank you.